Hello, everyone. Welcome today to the Battery Materials Investment Outlook panel. I'd like to welcome our three panelists. We have Dr. Chiam of the Singapore Battery Consortium. We have Cormac from Electrios and Joyce Zhang from S&P Global Platts. And before we kick off, I think it would be great if each of our panelists could give a short intro to themselves. So maybe Yang, you'd like to begin?
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. So my name is Yang. So I'm from A*STAR, Agency of Science, Technology and Research. So currently I lead the Singapore Battery Consortium. I also lead the battery materials research in A*STAR. Currently also taking care of the electrification portfolio in A*STAR. So I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you. And Cormac?
Thanks, Amy. I'm Cormac from Electrios Energy based in Hong Kong. And we consult on the lithium-ion battery industry, primarily in China. And we provide advice on lithium-ion battery cells, manufacturing, and supply chain.
And Joyce?
Thanks, Amy. My name is Joyce. I work for S&P Global Platts. We are the leading independent provider of information and benchmark prices for commodities and energy markets. For battery metals, we cover price assessments as well as fundamental researches on lithium carbonate, lithium hydroxide, cobalt sulfate, nickel sulfate, and its upstream raw materials like the lithium ore spodumene concentrate.
Great. So I guess it's no surprise that the current COVID crisis has impacted all of the mining and metals markets, but certainly also the battery metals markets as well. And I guess maybe starting with Joyce, do you want to maybe touch on kind of the impact that you've seen on the metals markets and supply and demand, and maybe where we see a potential recovery coming from?
Sure. COVID-19 has definitely put a lot of impacts on the raw material side. And looking at each raw materials, each commodities for the batteries, starting with lithium, it's interestingly that for lithium, we saw marginal direct impact on the spodumene supply recently, even though the Australian mining activities have scaled down during the first quarter of this year. But specifically for lithium mining, for spodumene concentrate mining, the scale down are not mainly caused by the coronavirus. However, we do see that all major existing miners, including Pilbara Minerals, Altura, Galaxy Resources, Mineral Resources, and Talison, have all posted a slight decrease in its Q1 output in spodumene concentrates. However, that's mostly on the production cut, on the voluntary production cut, in order to destock as well as to control its cost. Well, on the other forms of lithium supply, we do see some impact on the supply side in South America, where most of the lithiums come from the brine form, brines as in salt lakes. So as for South America, major two supplying countries, one is Chile and the other is Argentina. We saw that Chilean producer, the biggest one will be SQM, was not largely impacted by the coronavirus. The production remained largely normal during the first quarter. However, for Argentina, lithium producers, for those especially with their heavy operations in Argentina, like Albemarle, Livent, and Orocobre, they do posted a production halt as a government orders to control the spread out of the coronavirus in end March to mid-April. And we saw there have been a lot of delays of lithium projects in Argentina. They are estimated about 115,000 metric tons lithium carbonate equivalent of lithium projects delayed in the region, and those projects were supposed to start up in 2020 to 2022. Even though even though the in short term the lithium supply seems to be unaffected, however, in the longer term, there might be worries of supply shortage as we move towards to 2040 and 2050, while we see the electric vehicles and the demand for lithium kind of like went down the exponential increase. Well, on the cobalt side, cobalt are largely impacted by the coronavirus, as most of the cobalt supply comes from Africa. DRC takes about 70% of the global cobalt supply, and mining activities are largely impacted in Africa, as well as transportations. Most of the cobalt raw materials are shipped from South Africa, and we do saw that South Africa have been the ports and also the inland transportations have been largely affected by the coronavirus, and that provided some support to cobalt prices in the short term.
Yeah, I agree with Joyce. It's been a tough 12 months for the lithium materials, cobalt, and the lithium, as you mentioned. Lithium has been under pressure since late 2017 prices, but prices have stabilized over the last couple of months. Still low, maybe not bottomed out yet, but the forecasted volume of production is definitely not going to be what we forecasted last year. Is not going to be hit this year. It's going to be short by 20, 30,000 tons, and this is an interesting time for funding. As Joyce said, some projects are supposed to come online, new developments, and will the funding be there? Because initially this started with the Chinese subsidies reductions, and then we're hit by COVID, and it might scare off some investors who want to, as Joyce mentioned, we'll need to really scale up for 2050, and investors are already looking a bit skittery right now. So it'd be interesting 12 months, in the next 12 months, to see what will happen in the lithium market. Cobalt, as we know, is primarily based in DRC, as Joyce said, and we saw huge logistics problems. The borders were closed. Durban port was just opened. I believe a lot of consignments are still portside in Durban and not being shipped. But we haven't seen the supply in China so tight at the moment. Prices are relatively stable over the last 4 weeks because production is down, demand is down. So yeah, again, I agree with Joyce and her take.
Well, it's quite interesting to hear the challenges on the mining side and the extraction of raw material side. I think from my point of view, speaking with the consortium members, some of them actually see, for them working on the space, in manufacturing, they need to supply, they need to secure new supply chains for them, especially for the raw materials. But on the side where more closer to the product, the battery pack side, the COVID situation actually presents them some opportunities, because in some countries where the production starts to be affected, the countries that can cope better in allowing some of this production brings them new business opportunities. So some of the feedback I get for them who are still running currently, they are getting inquiries and they are getting business orders that they have not seen before. So I think this I think aligns with the shift in some of the supply chain route. So with this COVID, some of this shift might happen.
And do you think part of that shift is related to, say, the changing ideas about battery technologies and battery chemistries, or is it more of a supply this issue?
Right, I think the shift in the near term is maybe not quite related to that. I think the shift in the near term is when, for example, in some of the products, they will still need batteries. They will need somebody to fulfill that order to make the battery packs for them. And during this short period of time, they still need to deliver on their customers' end. they need to find an alternative source for them to fulfill these orders. That's where some of the countries who can cope better with the COVID situation might see this opportunity.
Yeah, that's an issue that's come up a lot. We've seen it for US. It's the single origin supply chain. So cobalt's coming out of DRC, lithium's coming out of South America and Australia, and nickel's coming out here out of Indonesia, more or less. And Europe's having trouble. Well, we saw the OEMs, when there's a shutdown, worldwide shutdown, they have no access to materials. And so going forward, I think, as Zhang said, there's going to be opening up of new supply chains, new routes to access from raw materials right up to battery pack and components, so that the US is really gung-ho on this, that they're not over-reliant and single source like China for components, especially battery pack components. And so we're going to see supply chains change, I believe, and it's going to be a new era. And we never saw this coming. That's the thing. But it'll be good for the market, for the battery market, because we're opening up gigafactories on every continent bar Antarctica, and like in the EU and US, they want to source the materials locally if they can. EU doesn't have an abundance of raw materials. US does, and if you can secure materials locally, then you can secure your supply chain.
I do agree with Cormac that there have been heavy subsidies posted in Europe in the past 1 year, in the past 12 months, and that movement towards to local source materials, like for example lithium projects in Europe, is still ongoing, and as well as those emerging new projects in America, in North America. We'll keep a close eye on that, on the emerging new projects.
So I know in the past few years, the batteries discussion has been really dominated by the electric vehicle story. Is that still the case, or are we moving into a broader energy discussion, and how do you see that kind of playing out?
Well, I mentioned earlier to you guys that when I came to Hong Kong originally, I was working on batteries for consumer electronics, and they shifted quickly to electric vehicles. Now this year, especially the last 6 months or so, all the interest is in for energy storage. So backup to solar and wind generation. So I see a shift in the market, the interest in the market towards energy storage. It's quite an exciting time for applications in energy storage. It's be different batteries, different lithium batteries, different requirements for electric vehicles and grid storage. There might be a little overlap now. We see that LFP is making its way into electric vehicles, mid-range, mid-priced electric vehicles, which might benefit the grid storage sector also, because we'll have a ramp up in manufacturing available materials to make, because the investment in the grid storage is not as great as previously, not as great as in the electric vehicle sector. So I've seen a pickup in the energy storage discussion.
Yeah, so I agree with Cormac. I think I have the same sentiments talking to both people from the public research side, both people in the stakeholders and the companies. I think the COVID situation, for example, the discussion tends to be centered around, one of the discussions centered around the CO2 emissions. And I think during this period, in the recent report by Nature Climate Change, you can see up to about close to 20% reduction in the CO2. And half of that actually comes from vehicles, air transport, let's say. So I think this has sort of turned the focus a bit on how this, how vehicular emission affects climate change. So on that, of course, there is the part that goes back to electric vehicles, but there's also the part on how we can use more of the renewables. And especially in Singapore side, we can see this happening as well. Recently, there's 3 grant calls just launched, specifically on energy storage systems. And we are also gearing up to look at battery recycling and reuse, which, as Cormac mentioned, if you are looking at the LFP technology, then recycling of LFP actually is not that lucrative. So reuse of LFP technology becomes very important as a second life use, and that's also another thing that I see that seems to pick up during this period.
I do agree with that. Transition has definitely been the key theme for this year and moving forward. And meanwhile, LFP batteries, we also hear more attractions from Chinese market participants as it's a lower cost and like a substitute for certain parts of the NCM batteries for the mid-range, mid-price autos, as well as it can be used for energy storage. So we are seeing more interest for the LFP batteries this year, and a lot of technology changes or developments, reworks on the LFP batteries that can be interesting as well.
I believe, Xingyang, you brought up kind of the recycling and reuse of these materials. How big of a role do you think recycling and reuse is going to play in the battery space moving forward, rather than the extraction of new materials?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple factors to this. So currently, the way I see it, recycling is still, as you correctly pointed out, is still a case where you're trying to address the issue of sustainability for the raw materials. But on the other aspect, the energy usage is very high. If you're looking at pyrometallurgy, the energy usage is very high. If you're looking at hydrometallurgy, the wastage in water is very high. So if you look at sustainability as a whole concept, then recycling is, I think recycling is still trying to find its place. But of course, on the raw material aspect, I think that is very relevant, especially for raw materials that is valuable and has a shortage. Then I think that's where the recycling will play a major role. As a sustainability concept, then I think there needs more work and advancement in the technology for them to reduce their carbon footprint in recycling to make this a more viable business, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, the recycling, the economics of recycling don't add up at the moment. So miners don't really have to be afraid. It's cheaper to mine these materials than it is to recycle. It's very expensive. As Xingyang said, the pyro is very energy intensive. You have to go to 1500 degrees Celsius. And one of the problems with the ternary cells is there's so many materials in there. It's very difficult to separate them all out and get the purity right. So the recycling network, our recycling lithium batteries industry is not established at the moment. But we have some time. We saw recently the Nissan Leaf batteries, it can go for 20 years. Tesla will have million-mile batteries, so they say. But regardless of which brand, batteries more or less will get 15 to 20 years out of the batteries. The first Tesla Roadsters will be shortly coming in for their 2008, 2010 Tesla Roadsters will be coming in for recycling with their battery packs. So they will most likely be put for second life first. Recycling materials out of the batteries, I think we got about 15, 20 years to figure it out before we'll have a huge mass of depleted second life batteries hitting the market. But at the moment, it's much cheaper to mine than it is to recycle. But the early work has to be done now. We don't want to be figuring it out in 20 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk a bit about kind of the financials behind it. Looking at the mining side of the business, financing seems to be somewhat easier for the battery metals or new energy, renewable space as well, rather than, say, more traditional, say, like the coal industry, which currently cannot get financed. Any thoughts on kind of where the money's coming from for new projects, or how the industry, the mining and metals industry, kind of can get back on track in terms of the financial aspect of kind of finding new projects or funding new mines?
I guess I go. funding, the main driver behind electric vehicles and batteries is government subsidies. This industry will not exist without propping up by the government. And we've seen some huge Chinese companies, lithium metal companies, going to DRC in Australia with investing vast amounts of money, but they're still, they're getting money from the Chinese banks, which is not as easy for Western companies to get money directly from the banks. At the moment, the funding available for mining projects for battery metals is not that easy to get, actually, and especially now. Nickel projects, you could get cobalt. It's interesting because it's expensive to mine it elsewhere in the world. You can get it cheap from DRC, but OEMs don't want anything to do with it, but they might more or less have no choice in the source of their cobalt's coming from. But it's a tough time for funding in lithium metals and battery metals. But we see big OEMs like Volkswagen, BMW, Daimler. They're going down upstream to invest in mines, and this is where the money is coming from right now. If you got to partner up or a joint venture with a big auto OEM, is one direction to go, because auto OEMs want to secure a large supply of lithium from one source, large supply of nickel from one source. For investment for juniors, you're going to have they only are producing a small amount of material compared to the big mining operations, and it's difficult to combine multiple materials from multiple sources into a cell that's supposed to be single purity. Each cell is the exact same as the other. So for juniors, it's a tough time to get money, I believe.
Yeah, I do agree on that. For existing miners, financing has become easier, especially for lithium, for all the existing miners in recent months. And they are more focusing on the mining process optimizations, trying to reduce cost and improving the techniques. However, for junior miners, there are definitely headwinds as the lithium prices are under pressure. Cobalt prices, we face a lot of uncertainties in the supply disruptions and the demand side. And as well as on a commodity market perspective, the lithium, cobalt, as well as nickel market are still relatively a growing market, a new market, and there are not many hedging tools available to control the risks and to hedge the company's exposures. And we did observe that many downstream OEMs, as well as battery makers, they are investing in upstream raw materials. They're interested. They are providing financing, controlling the quality of their own products to form an integrated supply chain.
So I do agree with both of them. So I think Cormac mentions government investment as well. So maybe not so much on the mining side, but I think the climate situation has really forced government to try to look at where they can put money into to push this agenda. And if you look at countries with very high penetration rate for their renewables or EVs, that is all pushed by government agendas. And so especially, so maybe I can comment a bit about Singapore. So I think Singapore has recently made some pledges and some commitments to try to, for example, reach a 2 gigawatt peak for their solar deployments. We are looking at rolling out mass amount of infrastructure in EV charging. So all this is going to drive, all these are there are available funds to drive such projects, innovative projects, test bedding projects, and deployment projects as well. So this is where some of the money can come from. Then separately, I think we have also talked about integrating down, maybe down or up the supply chain. Basically, I think this is where joint ventures would be something interesting for the OEMs to look at, to invest in when they want to try to partner with the miners to secure their supply chain and stick their best in the right supply chain to secure. And I think that might be where some of the new money may come from.
Looking at that idea of government subsidies, I know in looking at China, over the past few years, there were strong incentives there for both the creation as well as the purchase on the consumer side for, say, electric vehicles and stuff. And I knew that may have gone down a bit over the past 2 years or so, but do you see kind of a recovery coming in that space in China?
Well, they put a hold on the subsidy change this year. First drop is June, July, 10%. So EV demand, we expect to, we already seen an uptick in for April EV, and I haven't seen numbers for May. But June, we expect as their first a 10% removal of 10% subsidy, we'll see an uptick in EV demand in China. So every time there's an announcement, our subsidy change is due, there's a uptake in EV demand, and then after it occurs, there's a significant drops, V curves constantly. But they've laid out their plan for the next 2 years to 2022. So we'll have a 10% drop this year, 20% next year, and 2022 be 30%. But they've removed all subsidies for cars costing over 300,000 RMB. So that almost removes the luxury cars from subsidies. China had a problem with subsidies because wealthy EV buyers didn't care whether they get a subsidy or not, and but they got the same subsidy as a less well-off consumer, and so that made it very expensive for China. It was almost subsidizing, almost $2 per kilowatt saved. Just to promote the EV industry. I see what they're doing. They're addressing the fact that wealthy EV consumers don't really care if they get a subsidy or not, and the mid-range buyers will embrace EVs more if they can get a generous subsidy. And I think that's what's going to happen. They adjusted the subsidy scheme quite well, I believe. But when they first announced it scared the whole market. And in 2019, in the third and fourth quarters, there was excuse. The market really hasn't come back. There's been a significant drop, but it's probably just a road bump on our way to full EV adoption, hopefully.
Well,
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, so I think China adopted a very aggressive subsidy scheme to start with. And I believe, in my opinion, they were trying to affect that and try to let the market and technology catch up with where they want to be. And that sort of didn't happen. I'm not sure if they will tweak this going to the future. I suspect they will relook at it. But I think some other countries would have more mild sort of way to look at it. I think maybe, for example, like in Germany, I think they're doing quite well to more naturally affect the EV adoption rate. I think the same thing in Singapore. I think we are trying to in a way when we are trying to put forward subsidies to affect the EV adoption rate. We are trying to do this in a more sustainable manner. And so for China, I don't think the ambition has changed. I think maybe the way they get there might need some tweaking.
The goal for the ultimate goal for the government subsidies is to try to drive the development of renewable energies, etc. And China indeed adjusted its subsidy policies according to the market situations. As China has been heavily subsidizing the new energy vehicles, we saw that the Chinese NEV development was actually on a super fast lane back then in 2013 to 2018. However, we do saw the first time decline. We saw it in 2019, and the government adjusted their recent expectations for 2020 to be just producing around 1 million electric vehicles, and that's down about 50% from that in 2019. And government do adjust its new subsidies to gradually phase out the subsidies to replace its previous plans released a few years ago, saying that 2020 onwards we are not going to get any subsidies for the companies. So we'll have to see how the auto markets as well as the new energy vehicle sectors will develop in the tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so does anyone have any final thoughts on, say, outlook for the battery raw materials, the EVs, future energy storage as we move forward?
What I usually say, nothing's really going to change in the mass adoption. The chemistry we're going to use right now, NMC more or less, NCA. There's been a lot of announcements in the last month by big Chinese companies about cobalt-free batteries. That's nickel oxide type batteries, LFP. So CATL and BYD look like they're really going to push their LFP, which is something LFP was, 2 years ago, even 12 months ago, was a laughable concept to put in high-end electric vehicles. But as Joyce said, the changes in the subsidies and the work significant. It's not just LFP chemistry. For years, the cell structure hasn't changed. It was cylindrical, prismatic, or pouch, and automakers didn't agree which was the best. Tesla uses cylindrical, and a lot of Chinese customers use prismatic, and the GM uses pouch. But what we saw with these announcements of these high energy density LFP cells is that BYD have moved to a format. It's a pouch format, but it's almost 2 meters long cell, so they can remove the module. CATL has quite something similar, and this is a big change in battery packs. We haven't seen the likes before, and this really made LFP, because you don't have so much weight in the cell in the packs, because you remove cooling systems and extra modules, and it make LFP competitive with NMC, which is it was quite interesting this year. And I can see the role with the big push and behind LFP. Looks like LFP is going to dominate the mid-price market. Probably not the high end cars, but mid-price. Looks like LFP may dominate that sector.
Maybe I can offer a maybe slightly different view on that as well. So I think well, I can see the business as usual mode, as Cormac said. For the NMC, if let's say the high nickel content 811 and silicon anode is the future for the battery materials, that might change slightly if on the supply side, if there's a problem with lithium. I suppose if you want a high lithium content cathode, you might need the more of the ores from the lithium hydroxide. If that supplies become a problem, if the lithium price spikes, then I think that's another reason for LFP to come into play. Because I think the price factor for electric vehicles, the battery price for electric vehicle is a very important component. And it also then depends on how the mobility scenes evolve. I think if there's a movement towards what might happen is that you might not need a very high density charging, because if you can plan your route well, you can plan your charging well, you don't need your battery to really go for 600 mile or something like that. So if that's the case, then again, LFP might come into play. So I think there's a few different factors that might affect the business as usual view. But if not, I think I agree the general directions is towards more the NMC chemistry for electric vehicle. But LFP, that certainly is something, or even the lower lithium content cathodes like the 523 or something like that might be the dominant chemistry.
Joyce, any final words?
I totally agree with Cormac and Chiam.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining in today. And we hope to see everybody live and in person soon.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.